Hello and welcome to the 22nd episode of the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. My name's Ryan Blake, I'm the founder and CEO of Extreme Sports Performance. In this episode I'm speaking to Steve Green. Steve is a physical trainer and a strength and conditioning coach who I've known for many years. I asked Steve the questions I ask all my guests. Who he is, what he does, where has he come from and what has he done along the way. What are the key moments from his career so far? What are his top areas of interest? What are the most valuable things he's learnt? Who are his top influences? What are his top resources for information? What are his top sports performance exercises or drills? Or what are his top pieces of advice? And finally, where can people find him? We freestyle a lot in between questions. Had a right laugh doing this with Steve. It was good to catch up with him. Hope you enjoy the episode. Here we go. Steve, welcome to the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. Thanks very much for joining us. Please could you just start by telling everyone who you are and what you do?
My name's Steve Green. I'm a fitness trainer or a strength and conditioning coach. And I've had about 50 years in sport and about 35 years as a trainer.
Fantastic. Would you mind giving us a brief overview of your kind of career as, firstly as an athlete, and secondly as a fitness trainer, strength and conditioning coach, just to let everyone know the experiences you've had?
The background is fairly long, so as a youth, I was exceptionally fast and managed to get in the Great Britain team at the age of 16 in the senior team. And was stayed in there for some years until I was in my late 20s. So I must have, I suppose, got about 25, 30, maybe more, 30 appearances for Great Britain. I went from there into, I went to art school for 4 years because I fancied a rest. And then I went on to work in an apprenticeship in those days as a trainer under an old guy at Crystal Palace Sports Centre. Called Ron Murray, and Ron was a pretty old guy. He taught me basically. It was very much hands-on, get on with it. There's two classes of circuit training to do with 30 athletes. Get on with it, and there's a bench and a medicine ball. I just learnt my trade that way, and I eventually got very lucky because he put me in touch with the world of tennis. Got involved with that. Ended up being offered a job at the Lawn Tennis Association, and then ran their physical training program for a number of years, and spent my life dragging around the planet with a couple of top 10 guys, and just working hard and living in either great hotels or terrible hotels, depending on who you are with. Since sort of retiring from that, I just run my own show, really, do some bits and pieces, different projects. Got involved with a weights club, run a magazine, still do a lot of strength and conditioning with people. So quite a mixed bag, really, right?
Fantastic. Well, no, that's a really great insight, and I always like to ask guests that question just so the listeners know a little bit about their background. And what would you say, if you could choose, would be the key moments from your career?
Wow.
I know it's a hard question.
Surviving this long, I think, is the key moment. Still at 64 years old, still having to go to the gym and ump weights about with people. There are so many highlights, and I've met so many weird, wacky, wonderful, and interesting people all over the planet. It's really difficult. I mean, I spent one of my highlights. My wife is Chinese, and my son and my wife and I lived in China for quite a while, and I spent a lot of time working with some of their martial arts coaches and learned quite a lot from those guys, quite a lot. When I was on the road with the tennis, I worked with some very good people then and sat through some nail-biting matches and saw the highs and lows of sport. But I can't say that any of it is better than anything else, really. I mean, because everything that happens it's new experience. It's different people. It's different issues and problems and all this kind of stuff. And I just find the whole thing quite interesting. It's certainly, I can't ever say I've been bored. I've been extremely tired on a number of occasions. But in terms of highlights, I would say the whole thing.
I know that you have had experience with some of the English greats, Mr. Henman and Rosetsky. How did you come about working with those guys?
Well, part of my job brief when I was at the LTA, because I was based in those days at Queen's Club, so I was there, and at Bisham Abbey was built up and down the M4 between the two venues, and one of the jobs I was given was a young Tim Henman, and the coach just gave me the brief. Okay, you need to drag around the paddock with us and get him strong. So did that for a couple of years, and then they said to me, okay, we need you now. We've I think Greg had come into the British setup, and he came to me and said, look, I need you, what are you doing? And I said, sitting around drinking coffee as usual. So he said, okay, I need you to come on the road with me and get me strong. And so, it's kind of like, I suppose it all sounds a bit simple, but I was brought up with, there's your job, go and do whatever it throws at you, as long as you can put a roof over your head and feed your kids. Yeah. So for me, I never really saw it as a high or a low thing working with these guys. It was okay, you got to earn your crust and keep the family fit. So that's how I kind of approach these things. And I just got on with the job, really. That's how I got into those two. And I was still coming back and working with the juniors as well at the same time. So I was working hard in those. I don't know if I could do it now. I definitely couldn't do it now.
Yeah, well, I know only too well. Obviously, that's how we met working in tennis when I was doing a similar role at Bisham Abbey.
And you were doing very well, Ryan, I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Under difficult circumstances.
It didn't feel like I was doing very well at the time, but I think with your insights and experience, definitely made things easier. But yeah, that was definitely a whirlwind experience, but it did definitely pave the way and set a solid foundation for what kind of I came on to do after that.
I think you did great. And if you can survive a stint in a tennis farm, you can survive anything.
Yeah, no, it was a great experience.
I think you did really well, boy, really well.
No, that's really kind of you to say. Thank you very much. But it was tough, but glad I did it and gained all of the I suppose life lessons from that experience with it. With regards to the tours, Steve, like with regards to maybe the first tour that you went on, what were your kind of biggest challenges or experiences from that?
Well, as I said to you, I was partly, so one week I could be travelling with some quite beginner kids on a junior tour, where you might be staying in a hostel, and going down the local place to get whatever food you could rustle up. And then the next week I'd be away with the big fellas on staying in a 5-star hotel in the middle of New York, where everything was provided and a suite of rooms to myself. So again, it was a case of, you either had one week you had every piece of equipment and every conceivable backup, trainers, masseuses, doctors, food, psychology, you had every possible part that you could want. Or the next week you might have had like a wall and a flower bed and you were trying to do depth jumps off it because that's all there was in the middle of a sandy place, like 150 degrees with a load of sheep and people living on the tennis courts.
Yeah.
That both of those I considered to be the tour as far as I was concerned. Once you get on a plane or you're on tour, aren't you, really?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
There is no, I would say there's no hard and fast rule. You get somewhere, you work out what you're trying to do and what you can do, and basically you get your head down and get on with it.
Yeah.
You can always moan about what you haven't got, but you've got to take a positive attitude because people are relying on you to deliver your part of the job.
Yeah, no, I completely get that, and I think the first experience of as a coach or for a coach or trainer going away on a tour, going abroad with athletes is always the one that you'll remember.
Yeah,
because that's when all the things go wrong that you didn't even think would happen in the first place. But you just have to kind of go with the flow, don't you? And do what you can.
And this is right. And as you know, this is an apprenticeship, isn't it? You know,
yeah.
It's kind of, I know when a lot of people move into these kind of jobs, they maybe the image of what they are and the reality are a long way apart. You know, they're a very long way apart. And the image of a a 5-star job, if you like, on a pro tour, pro sport, high profile, against what actually happens when actually most of the time you're seeing the inside of the locker room or the car back to the hotel and then rushing to get an aeroplane. It's basically, what you're doing. And people used to say to me, "How come when you come home you don't want to watch sport?" I said, "Because I'd rather go and see a good film about something else because I'm completely saturated with with the realities of sport."
Yeah.
So the jobs are tough. I think people maybe who are going into it when you're young, you're thinking, "Yeah, this is going to be really great," but actually these jobs are hard, really hard.
Yeah, it's not easy, and I think when I first started out, I thought it would be. And as a young, keen, aspiring coach coming fresh out of uni, thinking you're the bee's knees, you quickly learn that you realise that you know nothing, and you have to kind of just find out things as you go, really.
But I think that is the big point you made there, though, is that I have a lot of people come in to shadow me,
Yeah.
And I'm saying, and they say, "Right, what are we going to do today?" Because they've come from an academic situation where they're being told that this will happen, this, and this, because that's what the textbook says happens. And I never really quite know what to say to people because basically I never think of a day like that. I just think, oh well, let's grab as many cups of coffee as I can to get through the morning,
Yeah.
and get on with the job.
Yeah.
But it's not in any way that you're constantly referring back to your reading or whatever. Half the time, a lot of the theoretical work that is there, actually, there isn't time to apply it.
Yeah.
It would be great if there was, but you've got to adapt it to where you are, haven't you?
Well, I think you just have to address what's in front of you, don't you? Because every day's different, every athlete's different, and then there's a different challenge or sets of challenges, especially with youth athletes every day. Yeah. So it's you can plan or try and be as organised as you need to be, but you have to be adaptive to that because nothing goes to plan.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's what makes it interesting.
Exactly. It'd be boring if every day was the same anyway, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It's certainly never that, is it?
No, it's not. So what would you say your career and all the experiences you've had, what would you say would be the most valuable things you've learned?
Well, I think you've actually said it already, is that you deal with what you've got and who turns up. Because, I have in my head a certain number of things that I think I need to put. I feel a bit like a shop, like I lay out my shop, and you need to learn about this, and this, and this. But then it kind of depends on the personality of the person you're dealing with, and the person you're dealing with is going to become the person they are anyway, and they're going to take your information and adapt it to themselves because that's their personality. So I suppose I just see it as now after all these years. I think, right, that's what I've got. That's what I can offer. Let's see what this person does with it, because everyone does different things with what you offer them. And how I've just finished a contract with a girl who actually way outweighed her what I envisaged would be her potential, purely because she was able to apply herself to the toughest part of training, which is routine. Yep. She always turned up. she was always warmed up and ready, and she made unbelievable progress in a short period of time. Not because she was the most talented person I've ever seen in my life, but because she was prepared to turn up, and she had people who were prepared to make sure she turned up and backed her parents, you know.
Yeah.
So she made the most of all the information she was offered, and as she's grown now, she's kind of started to adapt it to what she knows about herself. So it was quite an interesting project. But some people, you think, yeah, these are a great athlete, but they can't get their head around the other stuff it takes. You know, the routine, the dull boredom of doing the same thing over and again and adding a bit more weight. And,
yeah.
And this kind of stuff. People struggle with that routine. That's the area that I think is the biggest challenge for me, is getting people used to the dull routine of training.
I think I find myself saying that to athletes all the time, whether they are youth athletes or pro athletes, that it's the consistent, good quality, hard work done over a long period of time which gives you the results.
Yeah, totally, mate. Totally agree with you.
No shortcuts, is there? And
no, you got. Sometimes you're better off with a plodder. You know what I mean? You got someone. I'm kind of looking at someone. I'm thinking, okay, this person's going to reach their potential, whatever that is, because they've kind of got that plodder. You know they're going to be there every time, and they're going to finish the session that you set them to do, and they're going to try harder next time. And those people actually usually do a lot better than the person who arrives unbelievable and everyone's ranting and raving about them, but actually they're not prepared to do the old day-to-day.
Yeah. It's a mental game as well, and
totally.
That's very hard when you're young, isn't it, to get right and to have that maturity to apply it. Yeah,
and I think now it's easy for old people to say, "Oh, now it's different," but actually, that there is a mindset around that thinks by bringing in expertise like ourselves, or a psychologist or a nutritionist, that if you've got an issue to solve, that we can be imported in to solve it. Yep. But actually, I say to people, no, we can actually come in and give you some information, but the person who's going to solve it is yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
The idea that somehow you can buy in expertise to solve every issue is a bit of a myth.
When you're presented with a new young athlete, Steve, someone you've not worked with, what are the kind of generic or most common challenges you see them face in terms of athletic performance?
Usually the biggest one is time. Again, the thing I maybe because I'm getting older, I'm slowing down a bit, but I've always had the view that if you plan your time properly as a sports person, then actually you don't need to do that much stuff. If you do the stuff properly, with the right work, the right rest, the right recoveries, etc., then you can always up the workload. The challenge I find now is that because there's so much information about, it's almost like you've got to have every bell and whistle going in order to to go to the next step. And one of my biggest challenges, particularly with the younger people coming in, is that they've obviously got far more information now than they've ever had, but they're not sure how to process that information.
Yeah.
And the same that when I help coaches, and a lot of the young coaches I work with, I said to them, look, yeah, that's a great exercise, but does it apply to the person in front of you?
Yeah.
I mean, a great example of that would be my weights programs, which are usually probably no more than 3 exercises. And saying to people, yeah, okay, well, you've seen that on YouTube, and the bloke that was doing it on YouTube was great, but he's probably been doing it for 20 years, and it's doing it for a specific reason. Is it something you need?
Yeah.
So it's almost like, it's like going out to dinner. You're trying to eat the whole menu.
Yeah, exactly.
But in actual fact, if you just chose one thing that you really liked and enjoyed that thing, you'd probably have a really good dinner.
Exactly, and I think you can almost oversaturate the kind of gains that you are looking to achieve if you're doing too many things with average quality. It's better to do less things with higher quality. I feel that the results are much better when you approach it like that.
Yeah, because the thing is, apart from anything else, right, there isn't the time, is there?
Well, exactly.
How much?
Yeah. Yeah.
How much time do we, have we got? And sometimes I'm seeing people, and then maybe they say, okay, I'm going to see you 6 days a week or 5 days a week, and I need to see you 3 hours a day. And I'm like, what do you want to see me 3 hours a day for? I certainly don't want to see you 3 hours a day. I don't need 3 hours a day with you, go away.
Yeah.
And but so-and-so does 3 hours a day. Okay, so you're not so-and-so, are you?
It does make me laugh because people's idea of what they need is sometimes so far away, so far from the truth. What they actually need is to do less, better.
And it is our job to I suppose that's more where I would see our expertise, is filtering the mound of information that's out there, and making it applicable to the person that we're dealing with, and the time available and what they can cope with. Because a lot of the time, the biggest thing I see is people overtraining.
Yeah, it's very common. It's much more common we find with the young male athletes who've just gone through puberty, particularly after an aesthetic gain. Yeah, and it's easy to control when they're with you, but it's harder to control when they're not with you. But I've seen it happen. It's difficult to manage.
Well, also now I think the other fashion or the other way things have evolved is that a person could have up to 3 or 4 coaches or experts having input into them. Now, if those 4 people and the athlete themselves aren't communicating effectively, then you get a lot of overlap that can be cancelling one thing out with good intention of another thing.
Yeah.
And for me, I think the biggest lesson I've learned is get everybody round the table every couple of weeks, including parents and everybody, to make sure that everyone knows what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Communication is so important, especially with the development of a young athlete. And it's so often I see too many chefs or too many cooks, and it just, as you said earlier about eating the whole menus, I suppose it's like almost using all the ingredients. It just isn't going to. The result isn't going to be what you want. No. If too many people are trying to do too many things without talking about it.
Yeah, and it's become more common, and then you get people solve it. The people I've seen have tried to solve it with things like the WhatsApp app group, for instance, which is a classic. Let's have a WhatsApp group. But the difficulty I have again using messaging and social media and all these things is that it's not face to face, and it's a snapshot, and it can be misinterpreted.
Yep.
And I would rather say, let's not have a WhatsApp group. Let's go and have a coffee. once a week, and talk about it face to face, and then you can see what my expression is, and I'm not being horrible or I'm not disagreeing. It's kind of it accelerates the speed. It's a bit like eating your dinner. Some people eat their dinner sitting down and take their time and enjoy the food, and other people run down the roads fueling. Yeah. And I kind of see a lot of this in terms of coaching content. Like there's a coach that maybe does less but takes their time, and then you've got the coach that wants to cram everything in. And I'm not totally convinced, as I've coached this long now, that the cramming everything in is the best route, particularly for young people, because they can't filter it. Yeah,
no, I completely agree, Steve. I think that value of connection on the face-to-face meetings. Obviously, logistically, it can't happen all the time, but when it can happen, is so valuable, and I think it doesn't happen enough. Technology is useful, but it makes it too easy to be lazy sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree totally. I agree with you. Yeah, all these things. It's a bit like movement analysis apps and things like that. Fantastic things, great things. If I could work them, I'd be really happy. But again, if you just rely on that, and you actually you take your eyes away from the screen to actually look, you can subtly miss things that actually you would have seen, because your own technology, your eyes, your ears, and your brain, and your mouth are probably, far more sophisticated than anything we've invented on a flat tablet.
Yeah, exactly. No, I couldn't agree more. So the next question I was going to ask Steve was, what? And you can answer this as, I suppose, as a trainer, as a coach, as everything you kind of have experienced or are experiencing with the people you work. What would you say your top areas of interest are in terms of kind of sports science, coaching, etc.?
I was trying to have to think about this, because I was going to say, Beethoven's Fifth Piano Concerto was my top area of interest because I really like listening to it. It makes me want to do that. Then I thought, well, that's not really going to help Ryan in his sports science question. So one of the difficulties I've always had is coming through the system I came through, which was hands-on apprentice. I didn't go down the university study route. So I missed out on a lot of the academic knowledge that maybe would have benefited me more. And I've had to kind of cobble together, piecemeal a bit really, that side of my coaching. And I try to keep up as best I can. So I try and read as much as I can, around the sports science side as I can understand, but not having had that educational background, some of it does go over my head. So I try and get it interpreted by people, that's why I'm always ringing you up saying, what does that mean? but I suppose the things that I've always seen the body, or the way that people move, as a series of circular actions. And that's just my thing. And I think it's partly comes from all those years learning Tai Chi, when I was in China and that. The actions are very circular and soft. And so I was always interested to look at discussions that were about the kinetic chain and about systems that work the body as a whole. Things that weren't about a specific exercise doing a specific thing, but ways of looking at the whole package, if you like. So those are the kind of studies that I tend to, try and seek out more. I'm quite interested at the moment reading about the whole argument that's gone back now on kids doing weights again, which, I feel quite guilty because I never stopped kids doing weights. They've always done it, And it's almost like a bit strange to me that we actually ever even considered that it was something they shouldn't be doing,
Sure, yeah.
And reading some of the studies now. So I suppose if anything interests me, it would be those two areas. It would be the way that people have gone back to this idea that, of course kids should be strong and get strong and learn to lift weights properly. And then the other thing is this idea of the body linking itself internally and externally, if you like, and mentally and physically into a unit that works together. So I realise that's not a very sports scientific, sciencey answer, but that's kind of like in my head the way I'd see it.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, Steve. That's a great insight, and I love how you've approached that. Just coming back to what you said about kids lifting weights. Obviously that's the first thing that parents worry about. If my son or daughter lifts weights, they're going to get hurt. Well, if they are doing it unsupervised with poor technique and it's too heavy, I probably will. But I always
isn't that the same for anything though, isn't it?
Exactly. My response is always, they have to start controlling their body weight movements first. Then they need to change the speed at which they do all of the different movement categories, and then once they're happy managing their body weight, then they can go on to some very light dumbbells. And then once they can reach certain ranges with certain qualities, they can move on to some light barbells. And it's all a very progressive journey, and they have to earn the right to progress and build things up slowly. But I find that particularly boys, they're in a mad rush to try and lift as much as possible. And when you tell them no, they just go off by themselves and do it anyway, and that's when they get hurt.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky one, isn't it? But I mean, all of the research I've come across, it doesn't have any negative views on it, as long as it is done progressively, safely, correctly, and over at the correct period of time. And I think there's a lot of preconceptions about it being bad, when it can actually, as you rightly said, be very beneficial, and it's actually what they need.
Hugely, but I mean, I'd converted, I think I've told you this story, but I converted an old cupboard at school into a lifting room. And all we had in there was some training bars and some full-size light discs. And we opened it up to the kids at the school, the academy I was at the time, and it was so oversubscribed with kids wanting to come in and lift, and all that was in there, I refused to put in things like a telly or anything like that. All was in there was a rubber floor and a load of bars and weights.
Yeah.
And the key thing was that we had very high-end supervision in there, run by a weights club. So the weight training club were running it. So all the coaching was being done from day one with the appropriate equipment by the appropriate people.
Yeah.
And then we put in place a little competition structure so they were able to compete. And the thing has become so big, it was the most attended class they had after school out of all the activities they put on. And it attracted boys and girls who had not shown any interest in sport previously.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
And they loved it. And the strange thing about it was that, again, me being the old codger that I am, just assumed this was quite normal, you know.
Yeah.
There's an empty room full of rubbish, let's convert it into a weights room and start a club, because that's how I was brought up.
Yeah.
And I was approached by people saying it was revolutionary and all this. I was thinking, really? Just a load of kids doing a bit of exercise after school. I thought that's what they were supposed to do, rather than go home and, you know, and eat sweets and do nothing.
Exactly.
So they loved it. And I think sometimes we can overcomplicate what is with kids. Basically, I think kids just like being around other kids, and they like a bit of supervision and they like learning stuff.
Yeah. And
I don't have any problem with kids, like behaviour and all that sort of stuff, because I try and keep them busy.
Exactly.
So I think if someone's busy, it's like an adult, isn't it? If you're not busy, you get bored, you start messing around, don't you? I think kids are the same. They wriggle anyway. So you may as well tire them out and send them home. That would be my
Brilliant. I think my mum would definitely have liked to tire me out more before I came home.
Well, exactly, isn't it? But after school, you know, it's you want to get out and run about and throw weights about and sprint and run and jump and stuff, because you've been stuck at a desk all day, don't you?
Exactly.
I don't think it's complicated. It's like today, the obesity figures came out, yeah? Okay, so, all right, some kids are obese, then let's just try to help those kids, you know, improve their diet.
Yeah.
Let's keep it simple, and let's exercise all our kids, make sure they run about a lot at school, because they're there, so let's put some time into giving them time to actually do it.
Yeah.
Can't blame the kids if they ain't got time to run around.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of people who are first to moan about something, but then not offer a solution about, you know, towards it.
Yeah.
And I see it. I've seen it, you know, over the last 10 years. I think they just generally just need some help and guidance. And you know, in a very
kids no problem at all, are they? If you keep them busy.
Exactly. Just a little bit of very simple, easy to digest information, like every now and then. Give them the opportunity to explore and play and do it.
Yeah.
Set some boundaries, and then off you go.
And I think the other thing is for me with young people is I'm big on self-responsibility. I really believe that the more they can be involved in. So, for instance, if I'm setting up a circuit with some of the people I work with, I get all the circuit cards out, and I say, all right, well, set the circuit up, and then when you work out that you've set it up wrong, you'll know next time how to set it up properly. Rather than stand around and wait for me to put all the stuff out. And, I know I'm sounding like an old fart here, but if you're involved in something and you put your bit into it, you'll be interested in it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was what was good about this room. I stuck a load of pictures on the wall of old athletes I'd cut out of the book and stuff. But the kids thought the room was their own.
Yeah.
So they kind of bought into it because it was their own.
Yeah. That's brilliant.
So I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but the kids seemed to like it. They all got better. So.
Well, I think it's fantastic. And as you know, one of the things I spend a lot of my time doing at the moment is the head of strength and conditioning at a school. And we try to keep the gym open rather than closed as much as possible. Because as soon as we've started opening it before school and after school, it's become so much busier. And you're getting a lot of shyer, more introverted boys who are probably a bit more academic than sporty coming in to use it, and the difference it's making to their physicality and their health and their wellness is fantastic. And I think just making it available and an easy to access, approachable place is the first step. And everyone knowing that they're all in there to get better, no matter who you are, whether you're in the first 15 rugby team or you've just come fresh out of junior school, it doesn't matter.
You meet new people, don't you?
It's for everyone.
I mean,
yeah, exactly.
I think exactly what you're saying there. It wouldn't matter which school you're at. It's a case of about the ethos of what you're trying to do, isn't it?
Exactly.
The obviously now, mental issues are a very high priority area in our young people.
Yeah.
And we can certainly, I'm not saying you can solve these issues, but certainly you can, I believe, by a good structured sports program, I honestly believe that you can help offset some of the anxiety that our young people are going through at the moment, which is there for a number of reasons. And I wouldn't want to go into what they are because it's so complex. But I'm pretty sure that if I think back to my own time growing up, that when I was training and working hard and a bit tired, I certainly coped better with all the stuff that's in turmoil in the mind than I did when I was doing nothing.
Yeah. No, I agree, Steve. It's hard, isn't it, being a teenager, especially if you are, busy. I think just having that support network around you as a young person is really important, especially.
It's a good outlet, isn't it? Yeah, it's a good outlet for all that pent up energy.
Exactly.
Again, I know people could accuse us of oversimplifying, and I understand that, but I'm not saying that this will solve, but I'm pretty sure it would contribute to an improvement.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. There has to be some form of positive change somewhere along the line, and if that comes through physical activity, sports, training, whatever it is, fantastic. But as you rightly said, it's not going to solve the problem, but I think it will definitely help.
Yeah, it's like that, and eating, like everything, isn't it? It's all these little things joined up together. Yeah. Gives you a rounded person.
Exactly. So just to move on from that, because I could talk to you about that forever.
It's going to be a long podcast.
It would. But no, I promised to keep you for an hour, so I'll stick to my promise. Because
who's going to listen to me rattling on for an hour?
You'd be surprised, Steve. I definitely would. So, who would you say in your kind of life, your career, have been your biggest influences and role models on you?
Well, wow, when I was listening to one of your other podcasts and you asked that question, I was thinking that's a bit like Desert Island Discs, like bring your top 8 records.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking back, the old boy who I was apprenticed to, my coach before that, the two coaches before that when I was a runner, one of my coaches was a very hands-on guy, but he was also a very top academic guy called Frank Dick. And Frank had been the guy that had brought in the whole translation and the interpretation of periodization from the Eastern Bloc.
and he wrote a lot of good training theory. And so I learned a lot from him and my first coach. They were guys. These guys they were doing it because they liked coaching. There was another guy called Tom McNabb who actually wrote Chariots of Fire. He was the history research guy for. He wrote those stories. He still writes a lot of historical stuff now. And these guys were. So we used to have these camps at Crystal Palace, and these were the residential coaches there. And there was probably on these camps there would be legendary names now on attending these camps on a regular basis. You know, you like Daley Thompsons and your Steve Ovets and Seb Coes and these kind of people. You know, so in those days, you know, these people were just, you know, young aspiring athletes. So these coaches were doing a really good job on getting information across. So I learned a lot from my time at Crystal Palace, an awful lot. There was a really good weights guy there, who's still actually coaching now. Keith, he's still coaching. You know, these names aren't going to probably mean a lot to people listening to this now, but these people in their day were top of the field, but their information was really straightforward. So I would say that they were certainly a big influence on the way that I would deliver my own job. Then I went out, when I was working in tennis, one of the places I used to go quite a lot was Barcelona. There was a training camp in Barcelona, Sergi Boguera's place up in the hills. And there was a trainer there who spoke no English and I spoke no Spanish. And he had a gym, and the gym was just like a dark dungeon. Everything in it was broken. But he had some of the top players in the world in there. And I watched him, I used to sit in the corner and just watch him work. And that was, things like that, unbelievable. These people, you just sit and watch. I remember saying to him one day, how do you teach someone to slide? And he looked at me like I was nuts, you know, because everyone was going on about sliding on clay.
Yeah.
And I said to him, you know, what do I do? He just said, don't teach anyone to slide. He said, go and have a game of football on a clay court. He said, and if you don't slide, you fall over.
Brilliant, love it.
But it was quite funny because I'm sure I've told you this story. I start repeating myself. But he had this book with all his exercises in it. It was about 40 pages long. And one day he said to me, I'm not going to be. We kind of worked out between him and the translator that he wasn't going to be in the next day. So I said, oh, can I borrow your book to have a look at it? So he left me his book, and I nipped down the road and photocopied the whole book.
Yeah.
And then brought it back and gave it back to him. The only problem was it was all in Spanish, so I had to get it translated when I got home. But when I got back, I applied that stuff to a couple of the players I was working with, and that's when I started to make some pretty big breakthroughs.
Yeah.
And then the next set of influences was probably, as I said, when I went to China and worked with their martial arts people, because there was some really interesting stuff I picked up there about flow and movement and balance and controlling internal energies and stuff like that. So it was, I mean, there's always people, isn't there? You know,
yeah, exactly.
that you can glean something from. So, you know, the trouble is, at my age, you forget what you've gleaned.
Brilliant insight, Steve. Thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting and really, really useful to know. A couple of last questions. I think we'll come at this from a tennis point of view. Okay. What would you say your top sports performance exercises or drills were that you've used that your go-tos when it comes to helping improve tennis performance?
I would say the big one is make sure you turn up.
Okay. Great start, I love that.
Because, you know, when someone arrives, and the funny thing about tennis is you never know, you know this as a trainer, you never know what state you're going to get the person in, do you? Because you can't monitor the loading that's gone on before you if they've practiced. So that affects the decision you have to make in terms of the way in which you physiologically load that person in your session. So I always nudge the basics. I try and get everything done in the warm-up period before they hit.
Yeah.
Because that's the only time with a lot of these people who are totally overtrained and over-fatigued, you're going to get any kind of decent response to what you're trying to do. The rest of the time, I think you're spending a lot of time just on recovery work, because it's a non-seasonal sport, as you know this. It's a non-seasonal sport, and you're constantly playing catch-up behind some sessions and matches that aren't planned for, or go on too long, or inadequate warm-up because you've got a court available suddenly. The culture in tennis is compared to, say, something like track and field, where you were given 45 minutes to warm up or expected to warm up for 45 minutes before you did anything. Whereas tennis, if you can get 4 to 5 minutes, you're doing quite well, really. So I try and at least establish the basics, but have a very open mind. The key is to get the person down there and make an assessment of where they are at the point that they arrive.
Sure. No, I know that's a really generic question, and it's a question a lot of guests struggle to specifically answer. But I think I agree, especially with tennis. It's such a demanding, time-consuming sport with very little breaks. It's hard to find any opportunity to, to do any good quality physical training.
Yeah, but having said that, if you wanted an exercise that I really rate, is the clean.
Yep.
A full clean.
Love
I don't
it.
mean like a hand clean or this bit or that bit. I mean a basic hole from the floor up to the catch, back to your waist and down again, full range, clean. That, I have to be honest with you, if I'm short of time and I want to give someone a bit of a workout, let's say, I think I kind of assess that that's where they should be. If I was to pick an exercise, I'd say do the clean, because it's such a good exercise. It just does everything. And if you haven't got any bar, just do a burpee.
Yeah, love it. Brilliant.
Two simple things. They work everything, and if you haven't got a lot of time, then great. They're my two staples, I suppose.
No, I completely agree. Multi-joint, multi-movement, hitting everywhere, all the major joints, all the major muscles. Job done. Brilliant. Love it.
Done. Time for coffee.
Time for a coffee. Yeah, love it. I said I only had 2 more questions, and I was lying. I've got 3 more. So I won't keep you more than.
I'm all right, boy. I'm finished for the day now. I actually was teaching Tai Chi this morning.
Oh, were you?
I'm so mellow, and I enjoy it. You know me, I like a chat.
Brilliant. So I've seen you with some athletes using lots of cables, particularly on their limbs.
Yeah.
Could you just give us a bit of an insight as to why you do that and what the benefit is?
Yeah. So I like these. I mean, one of the great bits of kit that I think has really come on, because obviously, particularly in stuff like tennis and that, and now with the way that sport is set up, you're on the move a lot of the time. You can't get into a gym or etc. Then resistance bands with attachments, so leg straps, wrist straps, arm straps, body straps, are a way of, for me, doing functional strength training. And I've got a little bag of stuff which I've picked up over the years, like we all have, where you can attach to any part of the body. And by multi-pointing where you attach, that person has got to work out a way in which to do the exercise using the most effective way through the chain, through their connect chain, in order to get the most out of it. And for me, it's actually a really good way to spot where the weaknesses are.
Yeah.
It's like training in water. I do a lot of myself. I go in the morning, each morning, down the local health club, and I do a lot of movement activities, like slow dynamics in the water. And I can feel where my weak areas are. Now, watching someone, I can't explain it in actual physiological terms, but watching someone go through certain movement routines attached to a load, I can actually see where they're breaking down. Because it's very easy to do the old bog standard, you need to strengthen your core. I mean, what does that mean? To me, your core starts at the top of your head and goes through everything and goes to the bottom of the floor. that's your core.
Yep.
So, and for me, it's a bit of a chuck away line. People say, well, let's do some core. Well, the fact that you walk down the road, you're employing your core, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a standard kind of throwaway line, really, core. So that's why I like the resistances, because you can just kit them up and look and see what's really going on. And if you look at a sport like tennis, where you've got to generate power through that chain by any sport really, but any movements-based sport, change of direction-based sport in particular, if there's a breakdown in that chain, then it's going to show technically. And it's no good mending the technique if the technique can't be supported by the strength. That would be the way I'd see it.
Sure. I've never seen anyone do that until I saw you do it, and I've then tried it myself, and then I've employed using it with athletes from many different sports, particularly racket sports and track and field sports, and I use it a lot today with my multi-eventers, my decathletes, and they get a lot of benefit out of it from like neurological feedback.
Yeah.
And knowing where their body is when they're in off balance or in positions where they might not be as strong.
Yeah, because if you my view is that if you're trying to make someone multi-directional and multifunctional, then you can't just train them in a linear fashion. And a lot of the exercises that I see are often, there's a place for the kind of linear straight line work, and there's a place for the the multi-directional kinetic chain work. And I think if you match those two correctly, you can have a complete person.
Yeah.
I think it's when you get bogged down with, the limb has got to move a certain way to develop a certain area, etc. Sport's not like that, is it?
No.
You're falling over, you're twisting and turning, you're jumping about, you're running. It's just not like that. That if you just rely on linear training, you're going to end up with, a totally conditioned person.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Love it, and that's a fantastic explanation, and I think they are very useful. Final question then: if you could give advice to either the younger you or an aspiring athlete, what would be your kind of top pieces of advice?
My first one would be get yourself a proper job rather than doing this really. It's too hard. Get yourself a job where you're home at a reasonable time in the day.
And you actually see your family and friends,
yeah. But if you have to do it, then my advice, you know me long enough, my advice is try not to take yourself too seriously.
Yep.
Because this job will test you to the limit, and if you can't turn around at the end of it and have a bit of a giggle and go away and have a coffee and then sort out the problem when you come back, then it'll drive you nuts.
Yeah.
Because this job is the emotion involved in, I would say out of all the coaching team, that the trainer gets most of the, I'm not going to use a rude word, but most of the rubbish dumped on them at some point, because they spend most time with the sports athlete, and a lot of their work is very close on, face-to-face, hands-on, stretching work, emotional, body work that actually, but also you're dealing with pushing them psychologically to get more out of them. So you are getting the brunt of every bad thing that may have happened in other areas. And if you actually started listening to some of the stuff that you and took it on board, you'd end up having a breakdown.
Yeah.
So you've got to be able to cut out, I think, have a laugh, have another life as well, because if you don't, this kind of work would honestly, it'll break you.
Brilliant advice, Steve. I mean, as you know, I happened to me back in the early start of my career. I burnt myself out because I was just trying to do everything.
Save the world, isn't it?
100 miles an hour, exactly, and then
Yeah.
you just don't put yourself first. And I think because you're so used to looking after others,
Yeah.
it's sometimes easy to forget to look after yourself. But when it's one of the most important things anyone should do.
Because also, if you're not looked after yourself, you're actually no use to that person.
Exactly.
Because you're down on the same level as them, in a heap in the corner. When actually what you need to be is like a structure, don't you? You need to be, okay, well, I'm okay, and I can help you be okay because I'm okay.
Yeah.
But it is this, I mean, you know me, I paint, I listen to music, I go on holiday a lot, I go to galleries, and the time I spend between is actually for me how I cope with this job. Because if I didn't do it, if I was just hanging about all day waiting to do my job, I think I'd be hopeless because you don't bring anything to the nothing fresh to the table, do you? You know?
Exactly. Well, you can only bring to the table what you kind of save for yourself, and
Exactly.
if you don't save anything, you can't really bring anything. So it's kind of a vicious circle, isn't it?
Yeah, you gotta have, you know, ultimately, you know, you've got to be able to enjoy the job, I think, and if you don't enjoy it, then go and get yourself a different job because you need to enjoy this job in order to do it because it's too hard otherwise.
Yeah.
It really is, you know.
So Steve, I can't thank you enough for your time.
Hey, mate, I really enjoyed it. And I tell you, I don't know how I answered half those questions. It's my usual babbling on, but you know, it's a pleasure. And thanks for you know for letting an old fella rattle on. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, well, no, it was an absolute pleasure, and it's great to catch up with you again. If people wanted to get in touch with you, Steve, what was the best way they could do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple of things. They can either go through your own site, because I know you and I are obviously in contact a lot. That's okay. Or they can just get hold of me at sgreenfitness@hotmail.com.
Brilliant. If you're happy for me to do it, I'll put your email in the show notes.
Yes,
So
mate, that'd be great. Yeah, that'd
people
be really
can
good. Well, that's excellent. You know.
reach out to you directly. Excellent. Well,
Yeah.
look, stay on the line because I'm just going to end the recording. But yeah, thanks again, mate, and all the best.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the 22nd episode. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please leave us a rating and or review on whichever platform you're listening on. Please check out our website www.extremesportsperformance.com. On our media page we have weekly blogs that include Thought of the Week, Exercise of the Week, Recipe of the Week and Training Song of the Week. Each month's collection gets compiled into our monthly newsletter along with company service and store updates. You can sign up for free to receive this via our subscribe page. Our online store consists of training programs, online and in-person coaching, nutrition plans, toolbox and interactive training systems. Please follow us on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. Links to these can be found at the bottom of every page on our website or via any search engine. That's all for now. Until next time, take care.